The Trump White House is seriously talking about taking over Greenland. Recent events have made people there nervous.
Since the situation in Venezuela, it seems like things can happen from day to day.
I'm Marco Werman.
And I'm Carolyn Beeler. How locals in Greenland are feeling today.
And what it means when the United States backs away from the system of international law that it helped create.
Without the rules of the game, it's simply chaos, and it is might makes right.
We'll also hear about a Taiwanese kid from Guatemala trying to make friends at his new school in Texas.
This girl who's sitting next to me, she turns around and she goes, "You know, you're strange looking Mexican."
Plus, the soccer superfan who would be prime minister. All of that and more today here on The World.
This is The World. I'm Carolyn Beeler.
And I'm Marco Werman. Thank you for joining us today. The White House is stepping up its rhetorical threats about acquiring Greenland. The goal here, according to news reports, is to pressure the government in Denmark into selling its territory to the United States. But President Trump's team says it's looking at all options and refuses to take military force off the table.
The administration's fixation with taking Greenland presents a potential threat to U.S. allies in Europe and to the NATO military alliance. It is also a big deal for the people of Greenland. We wanted to find out how they see what is going on, so I called up some folks I met while reporting there in August.
It is deeply concerning being looked at as a commodity. They think they can buy a Greenlander.
This is Mike Nikolaisen. He owns a hotel that overlooks a fjord in East Greenland, which is remote even by the standards of this icy Arctic territory.
When they talk about Greenland, it's about just a landmass, and it's about U.S. safety, U.S. concerns, and not about the people living in it. And people are concerned and surprised and nevertheless afraid, obviously.
Greenland's prime minister earlier this week told residents not to panic. An invasion is not imminent. People are still worried, though. Paul Sorensen, who lives in the same East Greenland town, says it seems like a resource grab is underway.
Our country is not the same situation as Venezuela, but our country has resources and minerals that are very attractive for other countries.
That includes rare earth metals needed for high-tech development.
And that's what we are worried about.
Paul, are you personally worried about an invasion by the U.S.?
Yes, I am worried, but not necessarily about the U.S., but of any big, powerful nation, I am.
Are you more worried this week than you were, say, last week?
Yes, I am definitely. Since the situation in Venezuela, it seems like things can happen from day to day. And we don't have weapons to fight back.
European Union leaders have joined together to vigorously reject the idea of U.S. intervention in Greenland. Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen spoke Monday in an interview with Danish broadcaster TV2.
Firstly, I believe that the U.S. president should be taken seriously when he says that he wants Greenland.
She added that if the U.S. attacks another NATO country militarily, quote, everything stops.
That is, including our NATO, and thus the security that has been provided since the end of the Second World War.
U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said he plans to meet with Danish officials next week. It's not clear if leaders from Greenland will be included. Greenland is a self-governing territory of Denmark, but there is an increasingly vocal movement there for full independence. Members of that movement see an opportunity right now, including Kuno Fenker, a lawmaker seen as aggressively pro-independence.
In my opinion, it gives us urgency and a lot of discussions in regards to Greenland's independence. We need to be a sovereign state so that we can make our own agreements with, for example, the USA.
So that is some of what we're hearing from Greenland. There are also questions for the whole world when it comes to international law. That's because of the Trump administration's intentions in Greenland, as well as the actions it has already taken in Venezuela. Michael Schmidt is a professor of international law at the University of Reading. He is also a professor emeritus at the U.S. Naval War College. I started our conversation by asking him whether the United States is now making a radical break from its past commitments to international law.
Well, it's an incredibly radical break. Remember that the United States was the country that is probably most responsible for the establishment of the current legal rules of the game through the UN Charter in 1945 following World War II. So we see the United States deviating from the very legal architecture that it had created.
And tell me more about that legal architecture that it created. What are we talking about when we talk about international law?
International law is about allowing states to do what they want to do. That's the notion of sovereignty, so long as it doesn't affect other states in a negative way, and so long as it's consistent with, for example, international human rights law. So if we take Venezuela very quickly, or once over in Venezuela, we had the United States use force against Venezuela in violation of the UN Charter's prohibition on the use of force. We saw the United States engage in law enforcement activities on the territory of Venezuela, which is a violation of the prohibition on intervention into the internal affairs of another state, as well as sovereignty. And we saw the United States initiate a war, what international lawyers call an international armed conflict. It really has ruptured the very basics, the very fundamental rules, the bedrock rules of international law.
I do want to just push back on that a bit, though, highlighting examples such as Iraq. There was plenty of criticism of how the U.S. went into Iraq without a mandate from the United Nations. Is this really an entirely different situation, what the U.S. has just done in Venezuela?
Well, it is an entirely different situation. You can make an argument that Iraq was different because at the time we moved into Iraq, there was a ceasefire in place that had been recognized by the UN Security Council. And the belief at the time was that there had been a violation of that ceasefire. And under international law, that allows the aggrieved state to return to the use of force. That's somewhat sketchy, but at least it's a colorable claim. But here, there's no viable claim whatsoever in Venezuela. In order to use force lawfully, you must be acting in self-defense. And the stopping the drug trafficking, virtually all of the serious international lawyers agree that does not rise to the level of an armed attack that would trigger the right to use force in self-defense.
But a long-standing limitation of international law is that there is not a lot of power in the way of enforcement. International criminal courts are notoriously slow and weak. There are some wins, but not a whole lot. So how much does international law actually govern what is happening on the ground if there is this lack of enforcement capability?
It is a real problem. We've seen this over and over again. The classic current example being the unlawful aggression by Russia against Ukraine. There are mechanisms to enforce, so for example, sanctions, but it's not a robust body of law in terms of enforcement. That said, the very fact that states like the United States and like Russia that have engaged in the unlawful use of force almost always try to justify that unlawful use of force in the narrative of international law shows it does matter to some extent.
That's an interesting point. I'm speaking with Michael Schmidt, a professor of international law at the University of Reading. I'm wondering if we can kind of pivot here, and I want to ask you to give me an example of when international law did work, helped maintain peace or prevent, an atrocity, just so we can understand what it does at its best.
Yeah, the very good example is the first Gulf War, the invasion of Kuwait in 1990 that resulted in the Security Council resolution allowing a coalition of states to come together under the authority of the Security Council and expel Iraq from occupied Kuwait. So that's a classic example of an operation by the numbers.
So what happens when this rules-based international law system is brushed aside or treated only with lip service, as you're saying is happening now, and it's replaced with more of a might makes right model? I mean, obviously, countries with the biggest militaries would benefit, but who else does as well?
No one else does. I'm very concerned that what we're seeing is really a return to the 19th century, the spheres of influence and so forth. We've seen examples where there have been violations of international law and other states have exploited that. So, for example, in 1999, in Operation Allied Force, NATO attacked the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia in order to stop the killing of Kosovar Albanians by now Serbia. At the time, there was no legal basis for conducting that operation. We often say that was a legitimate operation because we stopped slaughter of innocent civilians, but you cannot come up with a good legal argument, at least in 1999, as the law stood there. But then when Russia turned its attention to Chechnya and the international community objected, Russia very quickly said, well, excuse me, you've just gone into Kosovo. We are doing exactly the same thing. We're preventing a genocide in Chechnya. So you see these instances where we dramatically stretch the boundaries or violate international law. They're dangerous because other rogue states will then exploit that to justify their own actions.
Interesting repercussions to think about there. This system of international law was built up over decades after World War II, as we've touched on. The world is very different today. The Cold War has been over for a very long time. Is there a way to make this system work for today?
The problem is international law is a body of law that always looks back. In other words, it's usually a body of law where norms emerge after something horribly bad happening. The UN Charter and the Geneva Conventions came out of the ashes of World War II. So what's going to happen to international law now that we see the major powers? Remember, both Russia and the United States and China are permanent members of the Security Council. What happens when big states, powerful states, the states that have the greatest influence on international law, start, frankly, ignoring it and doing what they will? My hope is that that will cause a reaction. I mean, international law, the understanding is very much like a pendulum. When something bad happens, it swings wildly back and forth, but eventually it finds its proper place. So I'll give you an example of the law shifting to accommodate new circumstances. When we were attacked on 9/11 by Al-Qaeda, the state of international law at that time was the right of self-defense does not apply to attacks by non-state actors. It is a rule limited only to states. But suddenly we're seeing non-state actors conduct an attack against the United States where the deaths are measured in the thousands. What happened is international law moved, and today the prevailing view is you may defend yourself against an armed attack, serious armed attack by states or non-state actors. So I'm anxious to see how international law accommodates itself to what we're seeing.
Before I let you go, just very quickly, I wanted to take a little bit of a step back and look at the larger philosophical point of international law. Beyond the ways it's meant to keep aggressive nations in check, is there, a bigger moral reason for trying to maintain this international order?
Absolutely. The international order is critical because without the rules of the game, it's simply chaos. And it is might makes right. The United States is an enormously powerful country, militarily, economically, and so forth. Imagine a world in which the United States just wanders around doing what it wishes. It attacks Colombia, it sends forces into Mexico, it seizes Greenland from Denmark. What happens at that point is something that we've already experienced in the last century. Remember, that was World War II, where we had a powerful state that started seizing territory in violation of international law, throwing norms to the side, and the result was a global conflagration. I don't want to seem too shrill or too alarmist, but that is the risk here.
Michael Schmidt is a professor at the University of Reading. He also served for 20 years in the U.S. Air Force as a judge advocate specializing in international law.
You're with The World. This is The World. I'm Marco Werman. If you are blind and flying alone, it's likely you'll be asked what would seem to be an odd question at the gate. Do you need a wheelchair? When Kelechukwu Ogu took his first ever flight from Lagos, Nigeria, to the U.S. in 2023, the question baffled him. He wondered whether it was just a thing in Nigeria or in America, too. So during his studies at Berkeley, he took a flight to Atlanta to find out. He spoke with blind people from different continents who fly often and asked how they feel about the wheelchair question.
I am at the United Airlines check-in counter at the San Francisco International Airport, and I'm really nervous.
The boarding pass, sir?
Hi, here is my boarding pass.
Are you together?
I want to ask for airport assistance.
Go to United. Ask for the gate pass for United.
Okay.
If my experience is anything like that of most blind people I spoke to, chances are I'll be asked to sit in a wheelchair.
My name is Vicky Post.
Post is a legend in my eyes. She was once a foreign correspondent, the first blind person I've met who has held this job. On a domestic trip in the US, Post almost missed her flight because the agent wanted her to sit on a wheelchair.
I was waiting. The agent came to help me and they said, "Would you like a wheelchair?" I said no, because I'm perfectly capable of walking and I love walking. They fought me and fought me and fought me, and I finally just asked a passenger, and I walked with a passenger.
My assistant arrives after 15 minutes. She gives her name only as Queen. Surprisingly, she comes without the wheelchair. The first place we head to is the security area. All my gadgets pass through the carousel tray, and Queen grabs them for me.
I've spoken to a lot of blind people, and they say people always offer them wheelchair even when they did not ask for it. So,
you know why?
No, I don't.
Because, you know,
Queen says airport assistants usually come with the wheelchair to meet passengers because they do not know if the passengers will need it or not. Better to be safe than sorry.
The default is put that person in a wheelchair. It's like going back to Henry Ford when he said, "You can have any color of my Model T car as long as it's black."
That is Henry Hartevelt. He has been in the aviation industry for 40 years, and now he forecasts for airlines. He says the only answer a vast majority of air carriers have to helping blind people like me is putting us in a wheelchair.
The airline industry, including airports, is guilty of lowest common denominator behaviors. And again, that's why the default for so much of this, far more than it should be, is the use of a wheelchair for someone who is otherwise able-bodied. Second is that airlines simply, until recently, have not really thought about accessibility. They don't realize that accessibility isn't just a customer service responsibility and an operational necessity, but it's also a marketing tool.
I'm glad to welcome you aboard flight 2145.
I am seated in the aircraft now, a Boeing 787. I've met one of the air flight attendants. Her name's Wendy. She did a quick explanation of where the call button is, where the oxygen mask is, and showed me the life jacket beneath my seat.
If you have any smaller items, such as socks, bags, purses, jackets, please make sure they fit completely underneath the seat in front of you.
Most aircrafts have in-flight entertainment and nowadays Wi-Fi too. When I ask how I can use the in-flight entertainment, Wendy points me to united.wifi.com, the airline's app for movies and music. The screen in front of me is not accessible. I checked one movie on the app and it did not have audio description where a narrator tells you what's happening on the screen. So I gave up on the movie. If I was not connected to the Wi-Fi service, I'd have little to keep me going.
if, for instance, I want to listen to R&B music, I make them enter R&B, and then they read the artist lists that's available.
That's Nina Okorafor. Nina is a Ghanaian Nigerian and she works with the Ghanaian government. She is blind and she flies a lot. When Nina is flying and there is no internet, she asks the attendants to select something for her.
Sometimes because I feel like I'm bothering them, I will resign myself to listen to the same song over and over and over again, or watch the same movie over and over again.
The American Council for the Blind makes it its business to write policy positions for blind people in the US. Claire Stanley is its director for advocacy and governmental affairs.
I know another complaint that I've rightfully heard in the past is that some in-flight entertainment on certain airlines has audio description, but in order to turn on the audio description, you have to have a sighted person turn it on for you. It is a little ironic and funny that in order to get the accommodation, you have to have somebody do it for you.
Okay, are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay.
I have arrived in Atlanta. Wendy guides me out the aircraft, and a lady is waiting for me right at the door with a wheelchair.
You touch the chairs to your left, and you'll sit down and then swing around.
What if I...
What do you want to do?
Well, you want me to sit down somewhere?
You just need guidance?
Yes.
You want to walk?
Yes.
Okay, so give me 1 second.
That was me trying to politely decline to sit in it. She hands me over to another guy. He walked me through the airport. He doesn't even introduce himself, and he barely engages in conversation as we walk more than 10 minutes. He leads me into the hot Atlanta sun, sits me on a bench, and he disappears. Fortunately, I meet Lena, an air flight attendant with Delta.
Could you please help me?
What are you trying to do?
I want to order a ride.
She waits for my Uber to come so she can ID the cab for me.
When traveling or whatever and somebody's dealing with a blind person or someone with any kind of a disability, just find out what they need. Most of the time it's really simple.
This is Vicky Post again.
And it's all so rule bound. And my thing is, you put rules in place so you don't have to be in relationship.
I tried to ask the UK and the US government for an interview. Many of my emails went unanswered. Airlines too were unresponsive. I turned down a wheelchair on 3 of the 4 times I boarded or disembarked on my Atlanta trip. Until people employed to work in airports are trained to listen, I will have to put up a gracious face and tell airport staff, I am blind, I can walk, and I do not need a wheelchair. For the world, I am Kelechukwu Ogu.
More global stories still coming your way. Stay with us. You're with the world. I'm Marco Werman. You're with the world. Security forces in Iran have killed at least 30 protesters and arrested another 1,000, according to human rights groups, all since protests erupted late last month. That's when a group of merchants and business owners in Tehran closed down their shops in anger over the falling Iranian currency. Since then, protests have spread to most of the country, and people's demands have evolved from economic relief to a change in leadership. The world's Shirin Jafari reports.
8 years ago, Sami decided to start a small business selling cell phones in Esfahan in central Iran. The 40-year-old asked that I only use his first name because he worries he might get into trouble with the government for speaking with foreign media. Sami put all his savings into the business. He imports them from the neighboring United Arab Emirates and sells them at a higher price. These days, he says, business is not good. It's now at a point where in one day you see the currency falling, he tells me. In a matter of an hour or two, the price of the rial falls even lower. Small businesses like mine thrive on stability, Sami says. How can I run a business like that? This is a bizarre time, not just for me, he says, but for everyone.
واقعا میگم مثلا اوضاع عجیب غریبیه. یعنی نه فقط برای ما، برای همه.
Driven to the point of despair, Sami has joined hundreds of merchants across Iran who say they've had enough. He shut down his store in protest and went home.
کلا خیلی خلوت و اصلا هیچ کاسبی باز نیست. حالا غیر از یه تعداد فست فود باشه یا حالا فروشگاه خورم.
It began with the cell phone sellers, he says, but now almost every store is closed, except for some fast food chains and grocery stores. This week, the Grand Bazaar of Tehran was once again the scene of protests. Security forces clashed with demonstrators. They fired tear gas and arrested some of them. But the protesters keep coming back. The Iranian currency, the rial, has lost its value by a whopping 40% since last June. Food prices have skyrocketed.
من دیگه سال‌هاست میوه نمیذارم تو برنامه غذایی مراجعه کنندگان به صورت پیش‌فرض.
Razia is a dietitian in Tehran. She says she's stopped including fruits in her clients' diet or eggs. I can't assume they can afford them, she says. The protests have now reached even smaller towns in Iran. In this video from the western city of Abdanan, security forces waved to the protesters instead of cracking down on them, a sign that in some instances they too are joining the movement. In other locations, however, security forces have killed, beaten, and arrested people. Children have been among the victims, according to human rights groups. Esfandiar Batmangilic heads the Bourse and Bazaar Foundation, an economic think tank based in London. He says there's a diversity of political and social ideologies among the merchants in Iran, but historically they've been socially conservative. In more recent years, however, Iran's economic woes have put pressure on their businesses.
The bazaar represents one of the most networked spaces within Iran. It is a place where a particular social group, these merchants and traders and retailers, all work, and there are very deep social ties among them.
And in moments when their political and social interests are at stake, he says, they mobilize.
These are, after all, individuals who make their living selling goods to households. And like in any country, the ability to be a successful retailer depends on a degree of economic stability.
Business owners say they are being suffocated by the economic pressures. Much of this is due to the government's mismanagement, corruption, and failures, he says. But the U.S. sanctions also play a part. Iran is one of the most economically sanctioned countries in the world.
The main reason why the Iranian currency has devalued significantly in the last 15 years is because of the specific impact of sanctions on the ability of the Iranian government to not only earn revenue from exports, but even more importantly, to access that revenue and to make the money available for the Iranian economy.
The Trump administration has been open about the goal of its maximum pressure campaign to bring the Iranian government to its knees. In response to the recent protests, the Iranian government announced that it will be making a monthly payment of about $7 to people, to which U.S. Senator John Fetterman tweeted, "This is, quote, a testament to how our nation and Israel broke Iran." Esfandiar Batmangilic says, in reality, research shows that the U.S. sanctions are not having the intended impact.
Actually, when you make a country much poorer, and particularly when you weaken and shrink a middle class, you are making it more difficult for ordinary Iranians to assert themselves politically. It may be that protests become more frequent, but protests need to be connected to an organized program of civil society action, of political mobilization to really affect change. And that's what we're not seeing in Iran.
I asked Sami, the cell phone seller in Iran, what he thinks of the red lines that President Trump has set for the Iranian government. Trump said that if they start shooting and killing protesters, the U.S. will, quote, come to their rescue. We are locked and loaded, Trump said.
دیگه واقعا کسی نه همچین چیزایی رو باور داره نه قبول میکنه.
No one really believes these threats, Sami tells me. Trump has banned Iranians from entering the U.S. He has also made deals with the Iranian government to deport plane loads of migrants back to Iran. He says one day Trump threatens military action, another he says the U.S. won't intervene. We just don't know what to believe. Sami says he's planning to wind down his cell phone business because he's losing money. He's going to focus more on his other job as a driver for Snap, Iran's version of Uber. For The World, I'm Shirin Jafari.
Along the coast of Argentina in the South Atlantic, the country's territorial waters stretch out for 200 nautical miles. Then at mile 201, it becomes international waters outside of Argentina's jurisdiction. Argentina's Coast Guard can watch what happens there, but not much more than that. For example, when they see large commercial shipping fleets descend on the area to vacuum up as much squid as possible, they cannot take action. Ian Urbina is the founder of an investigative nonprofit called the Outlaw Ocean Project. He said the biggest concern in this region is overfishing.
In any given year, you're looking at 300 to 400 industrial scale fishing vessels. About 75% of those are Chinese and sometimes stay at sea for about 2 years. So it's a huge concentration of very large ships. And they linger, as you said, just across the line. Some of them turn off their transponders and go dark and come into Argentinian waters, which is a separate concern. But just the sheer scale of them across the line has real worries for whether they're taking too much and the stock is going to eventually collapse.
And why squid? Why and where is it in such high demand?
Well, calamari is a worldwide popular appetizer, and so there's an always growing demand for it. And China is the superpower of seafood. They consume and produce and export more than anywhere else in the world. And these waters, the specific regions often called the blue hole, are extremely rich just for reasons of science and the nature of the flows that go through there. It's a really rich squid fishing zone. So in a given year, the Chinese fleet will sort of hug the coast of South America and come down. They'll arrive around Peru on the western side of South America, and they'll come all the way down the coast of Chile, come around the corner and up the side of between the Falkland Islands and Argentina. And the blue hole is right there, and that's where they'll linger longest.
So the South Atlantic obviously is very far from China, but there is this Chinese distant water fleet. Tell us more about that and who operates it.
These are typically huge vessels. About half of them are at least partially state-owned, if not fully state-owned, the ones that come from China. China has the biggest distant water fishing fleet in the world. The next three largest countries' fleets combined don't top China's number. We're talking about maybe 6,500 to 7,000 ships globally. The squid fleet is the biggest portion of China's distant water fleet. They're big industrial vessels. They tend to travel as a group, usually anywhere from 50 to 200 together. Sometimes those fleets have a medical vessel with the fleet that sort of takes care of health emergencies on board of any of the vessels. Sometimes they also have security vessels that travel with the fleet. The catch that they pull on board tends to be quickly frozen. It's mildly processed, frozen. And then every month or so, a refrigeration vessel, often called a reefer vessel, a big ship comes and picks up the catch and takes it back to China so that the fishing vessels can keep working.
So the catch is taken back to China and then sold around the world?
Yeah, it's typically processed in China as cheap labor and huge infrastructure and low labor and environmental regs, and then it's exported to everywhere, including in our investigation, cafeterias and in Congress and public schools and prisons and military bases. This catch is consumed by everyone, including in the U.S.
So I gather that not even 10 years ago, the Chinese government said it would stop expanding its distant water fleet. So what's going on?
China, the environmental concerns, whether they're fishing the world's oceans too intensely, that is one front where the Chinese government actually has pushed advances, and they're tightening the regulations on environmental controls, especially as regards their own waters. When it comes to intensely overfishing the high seas? Not as much. So while they may have fewer ships, the hours that the ships are working and the efficiency of the work they're doing, in other words, how much catch they're pulling out of the water, hasn't gone down. On the labor rights concerns that exist on these ships, there's very little progress, and things are as bad as they've ever been.
So what does this mean further down the food chain for other species that are part of this whole ecosystem in this Mile 201?
So think of two categories, food and climate, right? So if you think of the food pyramid in the water, you've got species eating other species, eating other species. And if you eliminate a huge portion of that triangle, then you have knock-on effects above and below. And so overfishing squid is really consequential because a lot of other species, whales and tuna and other key predator species, rely on squid as their main diet, right? So that's one big concern of overfishing. The other concern is climate, right? So the 80% of the oxygen we breathe is cleansed by the ocean. And it's not the water that does it, it's the marine life there. If you collapse the world's oceans, you are going to have a huge climate impact because the temperature stabilizing and the cleaning function and the carbon capture that all this marine life is doing goes away. So both of those things are big concerns that tie all the way down to squid.
What has been Argentina's response to all of this?
Well, I mean, one, they're constantly eager to show their own population, that they are doing something about it because, the issue of foreign encroachment is a politically sensitive one and it sways elections and it makes for good media at home and it's constantly getting leveraged by this political party against that political party. So the government in power is always eager to show, hey, we know and we're doing something about it. Internationally, the Argentinians are also trying to constantly get support from other neighbors. And the last thing is regulations, the regulations that exist on these kinds of waters and these kinds of ships and what are the consequences when an incursion happens only tend to work when nations cooperate and they all sort of agree they're all going to impose rules. That kind of cooperation hasn't existed between these countries. So when Uruguay or Peru imposes stricter rules, as they did several years ago on the Chinese fleet switches their location, in this case to Argentina, and more of them start going there because the rules are much laxer and the consequences are much lighter. And so that's a problem that the Argentinians are having to deal with, is how to strengthen their regs.
So if Argentina can't actually take any action to restrict fishing in this area, what recourse does it ultimately have?
That's right. Not a whole heck of a lot. This is a huge global problem of how to police and regulate and govern a non-governing space, outer space, the poles, the high seas. These are all global commons, they're often called. These are places where no single government has authority. So governments have to work together, which is not a popular thing right now, to come up with some sort of alternate mechanisms to try to protect those spaces and share the resources. And that's effort that's not doing very well these days.
Ian Urbina is with the Outlaw Ocean Project. He spoke with us from Washington. The Africa Cup of Nations, better known as AFCON, is underway right now in Morocco. The soccer tournament has been held every 2 years for nearly half a century. It's a moment where African players strut their talents long overlooked in other parts of the soccer-playing world.
One of the people during this edition of AFCON that's gotten a lot of attention is not on the field, but in the stands. He is a Congolese superfan.
And there's a man who pays tribute to late Patrice Lumumba, stands that way the entire match. Yeah. Motionless. It's a very glowing homage that he pays.
Standing still for an hour and a half is an unusual way to support your team, but Michel Nkuka Mbola Dinga is a super fan and happens to bear an uncanny likeness to Congo's first prime minister, Patrice Lumumba. A revered Pan-Africanist, Lumumba was killed in January of 1961. It is widely believed with collusion from Belgium and the United States.
Patrice Lumumba comes back to Leopoldville a prisoner.
The former Congo premier, who was captured when he fled inland, no longer wears the tuft of
Most spectators at AFCON don't even know Mbola Dinga's real name. They've just been calling the fan of Team Congo Lumumba.
The first AFCON matches in Morocco kicked off in the last week of December. Since then, Lumumba has been a regular presence at Congo's games, playing his role as the late prime minister. He brings a podium to stand on, strikes a pose, hand in the air, pointing to a glorious future, and as the commentator said, remaining that way, upright and still for the full 90 minutes of every match.
Yesterday, Congo's match against Algeria went into extra time, and Lumumba stood like a statue for 2 whole hours. Algeria scored the only point of the game after 119 minutes of play.
And Algeria are through to the quarterfinals of the 2025 Africa Cup of Nations in sensational style. They have knocked out the Congolese.
Lumumba and his fellow Congolese fans were dejected, of course. They poured out of the Prince Moulay El Hassan Stadium. But Lumumba remained upright on his makeshift podium, both hands hiding his tears.
So DR Congo is out of the running at this year's AFCON, but they still have a chance to qualify for next summer's FIFA World Cup in North America.
If they do, keep your eyes peeled for Michel Nkuka Mbola Dinga, a.k.a. Lumumba. He'll be the dapper fan in a colorful suit and bow tie, standing on his own podium.
This is The World. I'm Carolyn Beeler. There's no place like home, as the saying goes. Knowing exactly where home is, though, that can be complicated. It's something Chris Coe experienced firsthand living in 3 different countries as a kid. He spoke about that as part of GBH's live storytelling event series in Boston, Stories from the Stage.
This is the lowest I've ever been. So low that the music from someone entering the 7-Eleven around the corner causes me to almost break down. I turn to my friend who's sitting next to me, and I want to say something, anything, but I can't. There's only silence. I should probably start from the beginning. I don't have a place that I can really call home. Because I was born in Guatemala to 2 Taiwanese immigrants, I had the word outsider written all over me. At school, I was the only Asian kid in a classroom full of Latino kids who weren't welcome. At home, I had no one to turn to because my brother was too young and no one else was around. To make matters worse, I didn't have any friends at school. It was hard to make any when my parents couldn't afford babysitters or drive me around to different activities after school. Instead, they would take me to the store that they owned every day after school finished. It's a lot like the dollar stores that you see here, except everything was in quetzales, the Guatemalan currency. And since it was a store with a lot of customers, they would always be busy with them, and I would have nothing to do but sit in the corner and think about the horrible things that happened at school. One particular memory comes to mind. Oye, ¿qué hace gordito chinito? It's Augusto shouting at me from across the yard, safely surrounded by his group of friends, something I'm reminded that I don't have. This is 3rd grade recess, and gordito chinito sounds a lot like a cute playground rhyme that kids would say to each other. But gordito chinito actually means fat Chinese kid. And it stings. It hurts because I know I'm fat. And it stresses me out to the point that sometimes I will hide in the bathroom or pretend to vomit in the nurse's office just so I can skip gym class. But I don't let Augusto know this. Instead, I jump off the swing I'm on and I walk over to him. Now, I'm obviously a big guy from what he said, and he's actually kind of a skinny kid, which makes this unfair. But I punch him in the stomach as hard as I can, and I watch as he falls over. His friends are too shocked to react, and if we're being honest, it feels good. I feel powerful, and it's one of the few moments in my life when I feel like I'm in control. I walk away before they can do anything, and they never bother me again. I love Guatemala for a lot of reasons: the food, the weather, the culture. But Guatemala also struggles with violence. When I was in 5th grade, my uncle was killed in a botched robbery on the way to the parking lot from the store that we owned. Crime is common there, but foreigners are especially vulnerable because they seem like easier targets. And while I was born there and had been there for a long time, the way I look will always make me seem like a foreigner there. Naturally, this event caused my parents to freak out, and they decided to send me to live in Texas with my aunt. For a while, I was excited. This was America, the place everybody wanted to go. And I thought I would finally find a place to fit in. It's about a month into the second semester of 5th grade, and the teacher's telling us to partner up for a math worksheet. This girl who's sitting next to me, she turns around and she goes, "You know, you're strange-looking Mexican, but you want to be partners on this one?" And she's smiling with these really cute dimples, and I can't help but say, yes, let's be partners. I know she doesn't mean any harm by her statement, but it still stings a little bit. As hard as I try, I can't seem to convince anyone here that no, not everything south of the border is Mexico. It's frustrating, but I don't make a big fuss about it because at least I have friends now, and that's so much better than being alone. As I grew up, I developed this crippling fear of never belonging. Fitting in is easy. It's as easy as speaking the same way and pretending to like the same things as the people around you. But belonging is deeper. It's a sense of community, an intrinsic sense of trust of the people around you. And that was something I didn't believe I could ever have. In 9th grade, my parents decided to send me to live in Taiwan so I could be closer to relatives and better understand the country that they were from. I'm in beginner's Mandarin class now. Mandarin is the predominant language in both Taiwan and China. 你的中文听起来好奇怪哦. My teacher is telling me that my Mandarin sounds really bad after I've just finished reading a passage. At least she's honest about it. But she has the look on her face. And it's the same look I get from the cashier at the grocery store and the waitress at the restaurant. It's the same look I get everywhere I go. And I know what they're thinking. How can someone who looks Taiwanese and is living in Taiwan not be able to speak the language? I don't say anything to my teacher. I don't usually respond to people. Instead, I shift my accent slightly, and I reread the passage to her in the way that she believes it should be read. I pass, but deep down, I know that I've just given up another piece of myself. 4 years pass like this, and I find myself back in the middle of that intersection where we started the story. It's 5 in the morning, and I'm about to have a meltdown. I turn to my friend Pierre, who's sitting next to me, and I want to cry, to scream, to shout, to say something, anything, but I can't. Pierre's half French, half Taiwanese. He's an outsider like me, but he'd been there his entire life, and I thought he would never be able to understand what I was going through. And so that made it difficult to speak. Suddenly, the 7-Eleven music rang again as someone walked out, and I started crying. Now, I'm not generally very good at being emotional, but there I was, just sobbing in front of him. And I turn to him and I go, "You know, as hard as I try, I can't be happy here, and I don't think I can ever be happy anywhere." Surprised, he turned to me, and in a way only teenagers could, he goes, "Bro, what's wrong?" And I continue. I tell him, "I'll be graduating soon, and I'll have to say goodbye to all the friends that I've made here, and this will just be another place that I can't call home." He thought about that for a quick moment, and then with a sudden anger that I'd never seen before, he asked me, "Are you kidding me? You've been everywhere, but I've been stuck here my entire life. You don't have a home because you have many homes, and that's something most people will never have." I wanted to say something back to him, but I was too shocked to respond. Over the years, I've thought a lot about what he said that night, and the way it's changed my perspective. Here was someone who was my best friend, someone who I would have given anything to be, wishing he could be me. And more than that, he was right. While I can't stay in one place forever, I can always keep with me the best parts of each. And at the end of the day, home isn't a place. Home is an idea. It's the people around you. Thank you.
It is all about perspective. That was Chris Koh and his story about what counts as home from GBH's series, Stories from the Stage.
The World is produced by GBH and PRX, broadcasting weekdays from the Mann and Bill Harris Studio in Boston and from the Department of Communication at UC San Diego. I'm Carolyn Beeler.
And I'm Marco Werman. We'll see you right back here tomorrow.
The World is supported by the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, committed to building a more just, verdant, and peaceful world. macfound.org. by the Lumina Foundation, committed to a fair, universal system for learning beyond high school that offers every American the chance for a better life. LuminaFoundation.org. And by FJC, a foundation of philanthropic funds serving the nonprofit sector with donor-advised funds, fiscal sponsorship, bridge lending, and more. FJC.org. The World's theme music is composed by Ned Porter. The World is a co-production of GBH Boston and PRX. More information at theworld.org.